Okay. And now we're recording. Okay. So hi everybody, welcome. I've got Andre with me and I forgot to hit record, so we just had a full-on conversation. It wasn't too
Yeah.
long. It wasn't too long. It wasn't too long. It was only like a few minutes. But we were
Yeah.
talking about we have upcoming eclipses here. We were talking about how these eclipses are basically going to ratchet up what we're already dealing with in the US. Um, I don't want to make you say all of it again.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's not super long. It's just the correlation between the cycles that are already there, you know, reflecting the pressures that are already present, the fact that lots and lots of people are really unhappy. We also made a kind of quick remark about how Democrats are unhappy, obviously, with what's happening, and then the conservatives, but especially the MAGA people, they have this thing of being sore losers and sore winners. They never seem to be happy, with whatever is happening. So it's just not a super happy period, but especially for Democrats, for obvious reasons, and the fact that March, you've got the eclipses triggering important points in the American chart. The eclipse that happens first is the lunar, with the sun in Pisces at this time of year, the moon in Virgo, but it triggers one of the American key planets, Neptune. Neptune is high end, is very spiritual. It's a wonderful planet. The problem is that any planet, as it starts descending, can go to awful places. So Neptune is the most responsible for all the misinformation and deception that we've endured for years, because it's been in Pisces since 2011, and there's been this rising tide of this very thing. And right now, Neptune itself is doing its thing, but the moon, that full moon, is triggering the American Neptune. And part of what's going on right now is a tremendous clash of ideologies, where one side, for now at least, they think this might be a good idea. I think they're going to find out otherwise pretty quickly, because
Oh yeah.
you can't do any of these things that they're doing without affecting the so-called ordinary person. And there are lots of ordinary people that voted for what they think is this grand experiment, right? So full moon, we also know from full moons, I, every time I'm on a full moon, I feel the rising energy, and I actually like the full moon, but I can never seem to experience it without having the up and the down. It has this quality of, I'll do something to myself or something will happen, and the next thing you know, I'm spending at least a few hours where I feel off center and strange.
Yeah.
But then there's also this period where I am unusually clear about something, that makes a lot of sense to me. But in the world, this is why, for instance, nurses will say, oh yeah, when the moon is full, there's more bleeding and the hospital goes nuts and all of that,
Heart
right?
attacks, yeah.
So given what is happening politically right now, and you start triggering the country's planets, and yeah, you can get more intensity. And then the second one is a new moon, the second eclipse, but it's in Aries, and Aries is a pretty combative sign. It also triggers parts of the American chart, because Aries is at odds with the Cancer planets in the American chart. So right away, you get pressure that way as well. And all of this is also connected. It just turned out this time that the Venus cycle, Venus is going retrograde very soon, and it's going to be retrograde during that whole period. And Venus is a planet of consensus. It's what we all agree is what we all share. Our values are, for example, we all agree that you shouldn't kill anybody, or things like that. We have a set of values, right? But then of course there's disagreement there as well at the moment. And when Venus is retrograde, people are much more likely to protest and push back. And a great example of this is Venus was retrograde when the George Floyd situation happened a few years ago. The country, all of a sudden there were all these protests, and they have already started, by the way. So chances are they'll increase, and that adds to the contentiousness of it. And I believe what I said when we were talking earlier without the record button is that the one um, strong counterpoint is that I think is probably helpful is that two of the, in this case, nefarious players, the South African and the orange apparition, abomination, menace, whatever, both of them are having pretty hard aspects from Saturn during this period. And Saturn is notorious for either stopping you cold, dead cold, or at minimum, it slows you down significantly, right? So
I
that's the
don't
period
even
we're
know
in.
what is Elon's sun sign? I don't even know what it is.
Cancer, cancer. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one from the perspective of the good people of America who don't want him to do what he's doing, uh, Jupiter is going into Cancer in the
Mm-hmm.
summer.
Yep.
So I would be surprised if he didn't have some good, really good things happening for him during the middle of the year and even into the fall, except that by the fall, it starts to get more and more complicated, and especially next year, because then what happens is by next year, Saturn enters Aries and moves pretty quickly. Like the first entry of Saturn in Aries is in the summer. We're going to have Saturn in Aries for 3 months. The summer months are that. But that doesn't do that much to his chart because
Mm.
his Cancer planets are later. Next year, Saturn moves way in. And once it does that, then the landscape changes dramatically. It's like Saturn in that way is the uh, hard times type of planet.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
already his popularity has taken a huge hit under Saturn. Like that's what happened. The Saturn moved in close and he went from bad to worse type thing. He's in the 20s now or something. So next year, it's even more so by spring and into the summer months and into the election period and so on, right? So just saying all this in the sense that, if people hear, okay, well, March is pushback time, don't assume that these people aren't going to get some of their stuff through. They would have to be, they're not
Yeah.
very competent, including him. He
Right.
is far less competent than people imagine he is. Even though he flies rockets and all the rest, he's not super, super organized and smart. If he were, he wouldn't be doing what he's doing at Twitter and so on,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
But nevertheless, I mean, he does have better periods later in the year.
Now, would it be possible to do a synastry chart between the US chart and Elon's chart?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. You can see. I mean, think right away. Number of things, right? So the U.S. is a Cancer planet. He's a Cancer, and his Sun degree is right next to the American Jupiter.
Oh,
So, I mean,
interesting.
that's like printing money, which is what he's done. It's
Huh?
just a
Uh-huh.
very, very good connection. Now, that doesn't mean this is where people immediately hear that and will go, oh, but I'm also.
Right.
Well, okay, there's where, it helps if he's, having said that, I don't think he's nearly as competent as people think he is. Like he's
Oh,
this. Nevertheless, he's a smart man. He wouldn't have
right.
accomplished so much. So, in his case, it's greatly enhanced. But there's more because it turns out he's born around 7:30 a.m. near sunrise, and the degrees that rise are the American sun as well too, and it's where the
Oh,
star, the fixed star Sirius is.
huh?
So it adds. There's a tremendous connection between the American chart and his chart, right?
Interesting.
That's totally true. No question.
Very,
You would
very,
you would expect that, by the way.
very, very interesting. So let me ask you, um, I know we've got Uranus, my best friend. I have Uranus in the first house, so it is my best friend, but it's also been opposite me for quite some time and I'm sick of it. I'm over it. But so we have Uranus moving into Gemini and I know Trump is a Gemini sun. Can we anticipate him getting more insane? I mean, is this like is Uranus connecting in his with his sun going to make him even more volatile?
Um, yes, yes. Although, see, this is where the degree is important.
Mhm.
He is near. He's in the last third of Gemini. Uranus doesn't get there until
Oh, it's
years and
way
years from
late.
now.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah.
being in the sign does mean something, but the Uranus energy, you're much more likely to see the shocking quality of it. Now, having said that, though, it is, for all intents and purposes, in a way, prior to it going into Gemini, right? Like it's going to spend still a bit more time in Taurus.
Yeah.
And then, so it kind of goes into Gemini, pulls back into Taurus, goes back in. It's next year when it's finally in Gemini for 7 years. It'll be in Gemini, right?
Uh-huh.
But on the way out, it's in a really dicey place for him because it's
Interesting.
up there at the top of the chart, challenging his Mars, which was where it was. Because these planets, when they have big orbits,
Hmm.
they do the forward, retrograde, forward. So they'll find the spot and hit it a few
Uh-huh.
times, right? So
Uh-huh.
last year, that's when he nearly lost his life, right? That was the Uranus
Mhm.
square, which, by the way, that to me leads me to understand that the people who say, oh, no, that didn't happen, that was a staged event, I doubt it, all right? I doubt it. Now,
I highly doubt it.
the reason he got through is probably the Jupiter by then was in his sign, and so
Hmm.
it protected his life. But that it happened, that's classic Uranus. You know, when Uranus is squaring Mars, his Mars is rising, it was squaring it. That's like a bullet. You know, Mars is a
Yeah.
bullet, and
Yeah.
Uranus is the shock of, in fact, an automatic weapon is Uranus as well. So there's all of that. And he's getting more of that this year and into next year, I believe. Let me see if next year as
Interesting.
well. I think, let me see. For sure this year, in the April, May, June, into July, there's lots of Uranus there. And then more again, November, December, January, February, March, April of 26. There's lots of this planet being in a dicey place in his chart. Even before, so in
Interesting.
fact, I think that that's worse than when it gets into Gemini, if he gets that far, right?
Yeah.
So
Very interesting. So we've seen a lot of interesting stuff. So we've seen the far right sort of rising, attempting to rise in France and Germany. Um, and we've seen a lot of protests because of it. We've seen protests in Serbia. We're seeing which I feel like the Serbian protests are not being covered a shit ton on regular news. I don't know. I don't watch it, but I'm not reading about it in any papers or anything. But we have Serbian protests. We have massive protests against the ADF in Germany. I think we're going to see a lot of protests coming out of France fairly soon. Um, can we, I don't want to say blame, but can we attribute this to Pluto and Aquarius? Is this kind of the Pluto and Aquarius vibe? Is that why this is all kind of coming up now?
um, I think that okay, one thing is we will see if protests are happening in more places than the the 40 days of Venus, which are coming up, can show up everywhere because Venus is retrograde for everyone in the whole planet. It's not just here. That's one thing. But if you're looking for the whole world, it's because the whole world right now it is in a cycle, or we're in cycles that are reflective of major change happening everywhere. And the way to look at that is the similarity to the Second World War period when Uranus returned. Pluto was pretty much like on the other side of where it is today. It's traveled like halfway, so it's creating those pressures from the opposite sign. And Neptune as well is on the other side of what it was in the Second World War. So you get upheaval because the world is trying to adjust to new patterns, right? And the temptation is that people will think, okay, well, look, the whole world seems to be, in a way, it feels like it's contracting, and there is an impulse toward right wing fascism. Do not assume that's where it's going.
Hmm.
That's what they were trying to do in the 1940s. It didn't work out for them,
Yeah.
and this is where my hope, and I don't think it's just hope. I think it's based on something real. Uranus being one of the players, Uranus was discovered in the 17, I think it was 1782. It's almost concurrent with the American experiment in democracy. And then
Mhm.
slowly but surely, the whole planet, not the whole planet, but a big portion of the civilization became democratic. It used to be kings and
Yeah.
fascists, right? So, and Uranus has connections to Aquarius. And Uranus is a freeing energy. Uranus abhors being told what to do. Well, whenever you're having a Uranus, in fact, the person that says, I have a lot of Uranus in my chart, that person doesn't like working for anybody. They want to be free of restraints. You know, even when they're subtle about it and they're not necessarily like a rebellious teenager. So Uranus abhors centralized power. And in fact, think about democracy. What is democracy? Democracy is power of the people, but also of the individual, both things, right? So you're in this social thing. And for example, in the words of, that he's, I don't know if he's still around, but he's Isaac Asimov, he was, or is, a science fiction writer. And he was on Letterman many years ago, I think in the 90s. And Letterman asked him, what do you see happening in the future? And he paused for a bit and he said, well, I see a future where everyone is going to have their own TV channel. And I thought, that's bizarro. Well, in a certain way, that's what's happened is through
Oh, yeah.
technology, which is also ruled by Uranus, it allows individuals to express their views, which of course is not what fascists want. Fascists want to stop all views except their own, right?
Mhm.
But this runs counter to the Uranus effect. And Uranus is returning, but in returning to its place where it was discovered, by the way, because Gemini is when Uranus was found in the sky, and it's coming back to there. It just so happens that the American Uranus is also there as well, right? It just adds that thing. So uh, to me, this is the struggle to set up a new order again. But whenever there is any kind of change, individuals feel this too. When a person is having challenging transits, they'll say, "Oh yeah, that was wonderful. I love it." But when I was in it, it didn't it
Right.
didn't seem like it was great. I mean, including, I bet you would say that about yourself when Saturn tested you to the limit, and you don't want to go back there, obviously. And,
No.
and in fact, you might even say, well, part of what I learned was how not to go back there. But other things happen that really empower you as a result of
Yeah.
going through a period that is challenging.
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah, I would never go back. But having come out of it, it's kind of like, oh, I feel very and there were gifts, you know what I mean? There were gifts within that whole time period that you don't really realize that you're receiving. And then you get out of it and you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of good stuff there.
right, yeah, right, exactly. So and that was with Saturn in Aquarius squaring you at the time, because that was in Saturn was in Aquarius 21 and 22
Yep.
into the spring of 23, and then Saturn then when it went into Pisces, that uh, connects, in a harmonious angle to all your Scorpio planets. So it's a major change. These are things you see all the time where the effect is pretty graphic, and kind of surprises me that people sometimes say, oh, astrology, how can that work? I don't know, follow it. It's pretty obvious.
It is. It really is. It
Uh,
super is. I am curious. Okay, this is like I just want your opinion. I don't need astrology for it, but I'm very curious about Bong Bong Marcos running the Philippines. I find this very interesting. Okay, so this is the son of the dictator Marcos, whose name I can't remember, and Imelda Marcos. She's still alive, by the way, which I find fascinating. She's in her 90s, I think. But this guy is running the Philippines, and then Duterte's wife, I think it was the wife, was the vice president. They just impeached her ass. I feel like the Philippines are due for some real interesting stuff. I am fascinated by what's going on over there. And this guy is coming in and he's saying, I'm not going to run it like yeah, my parents were dictators, but I'm not going to do all that. And I just wonder if that's the truth. I'm very curious.
just putting in, Bong Bong Marcos is a born September 13th, 57.
Ooh,
So he's a Virgo.
the Virgo. Oh, so those eclipses are going to be having some fun with him for the next year or so.
Well, I don't know what the next. Yeah, yeah, but certainly the one coming up is one
Yeah.
for sure. I haven't been following his situation at all, so I don't know. I don't know what's happening.
And he
Uh,
doesn't want to be associated with his parents, more or less. Um, just sort of online chatter with regards to the Philippines. People are kind of going, well, he seems okay, but who knows what he's going to do? And, they were so unhappy with Duterte that they sort of went, Marcos just kind of won. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like, we don't really have any other choice. Let's pick this guy. And I don't know. I think he's either going to be really, really bad or really, really good. I don't think there's going to be an in between on this guy.
what terms do they get? What's the expected? Is it forever, or like when do they have elections?
No, it's not forever, but I'm not sure about um when the elections take place. Let me look.
I mean, depending on what kind of terms they get. Of course, I don't know. This is a case where when you're looking at a chart, I'm just looking at the day of birth, so I don't know the time of birth, but uh, that could, because he's got potentially the moon in Taurus, but it could also be in Aries, and if the moon is in Taurus, it might be possibly running into Pluto, and that could be at least a little threatening. But then from the other side, it's got all these Virgo planets, and right now it's a little dicey, but by next year it shouldn't be as much because the Saturn will stop putting pressure on there too. So this is one of those that is a bit fragmented to say. But the one thing would be that you say that he's not as dictatorial, right? Is that what your
I
sense
mean,
is?
that's his whole thing is he's saying, I'm not like my parents. So it's 6 years. They do elections for 6 years. So he just, I think, just got elected fairly soon.
Yeah. So I mean, for example, the Taurus cycle of Saturn, which comes in 28, and he'd still be in his 6 years. That cycle is quite good. It lines up well with all his Virgo planets.
Interesting.
But then the Uranus cycle that will eventually catch up to him because eventually it will square his planet. So it's one where it would be good to get a little more information about his birth date and things like that.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he's, uh, if you've got the information, if you're sensing it correctly, isn't he sounding a little bit like almost like a counter to all
Yeah.
these fascist,
Yeah, absolutely. That's I'm curious to see if it's lip service or if it's going to, really pan out, honestly. And the other thing too, we've got, Justin Trudeau is on his way out, and we've had him for quite some time.
Yeah, and it sounds like the conservative person will probably be,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, he's getting the best cards for me right now. I'm reading on him about once a week. I look at Christia, I look at Mark Carney, and I look at Pierre. And right now, Carney gets pretty good cards. Poor Christia Freeland doesn't really have a shot. Her cards are they're good, but they're not great. They remind me of Kamala Harris's cards because she's got all these great things going on, and then it's like the tower, death. It's like she's getting these terrible cards. So it's like she has half of what she needs and not of all of what she needs. And Mark Carney gets pretty decent cards, but Pierre Polivar, his cards, he's getting the better ones right now. Right now he is.
I mean, the thing is that you can you can surmise without it being a perfect correlation because I looked back in blocks of time and every single one doesn't quite connect with like where Saturn is. 'Cause Saturn is the idea. Saturn is the ruler of economy because it's a contraction energy. So if there's more Saturn than usual, there is more contraction, right? And
Huh?
Canada and the US are both cancer countries. And what I noticed is that when I went back and looked at Saturn in cardinal signs like Aries, Libra, Capricorn, Cancer, when you would expect contraction, you find it quite frequently. Like for example, the crash of 2008
Uh-huh.
led to the Saturn period in Libra, which was the, you couldn't get a loan easily. There was a period of
Yeah.
contraction, and then we had contraction in the pandemic because that's Capricorn. That was because of the pandemic, and you go back to the period with George W. Bush. That was a period of contraction as well when Saturn was in Cancer for different reasons, right? Like the contraction can take different forms, but it means the country isn't as happy then. And both countries right now, you can almost sense it coming. And by the way, what Musk is doing, or what they're attempting to do, is contract. They're trying to
Huh?
reduce, cut, right?
Huh?
Whenever you hear those words, that's Saturn
That's
operating.
Saturn. Yeah.
And there probably are efficiencies that can be done. It's a good idea. The problem is that taking an axe to it is probably not a good idea, as well, right?
No,
And,
it's
and
going to be
not
a
to
hot
mention that these guys are so fraudulent, they make adjustments to benefit themselves. Like they'll say, well, we're going to cut the civil service, but we'll give ourselves a tax break. I mean,
right.
that doesn't seem fair.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I've got an $8 million contract to build space whatever, but Social Security is getting cut. I mean, yeah, it's I don't think people get mad at me. They hate it when I say shit like this, but I don't think people have any idea how bad it could potentially get with all the stuff that they're
It,
doing.
it could, although before you say Social Security, Medicare, I mean, you do have to realize that those are the gateways, just like the stock market too. You do think that's why Trump, by the way, he said, "Oh, freeze the whatever." Then the market was going to tumble. No, it was the tariffs, and he suddenly said, "Oh, okay, well, we won't do them for a month,"
Uh-huh.
because he knows, right? You make a move, and then things can crash, and then your entire game is exposed, and you want to find a way to drop your approval rating 20 points, cut people's social security,
Right.
unless they're going to be so crafty that they're going to say, no, social security is only getting cut for the coasts. All the
Right.
people in the, I mean, I suppose, but can you really do that? I don't know. So,
Right. Yeah, and the only way they're not going to care if they do that stuff is if they have engineered a way for them to remain in power without fair and free elections. That's the only way they're going to do stuff like that.
right. And some people think that's a certainty. I don't think so. I just don't think so. And
No, my cards
time will
are
tell.
they have been historically, so I've been reading on this, because a lot of people are, it will be okay by 2026 because we're going to vote all the blue people in and da 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 da. So I've been doing pretty frequent readings on fair and free elections. Are we going to have fair and free elections in the United States in 2026? And the cards are definitely weird. They are definitely weird. They flip flop. So at one point I'll get a very, nice card spread. I'm like, yeah, we're safe. And then I'll read on it again and it will be like, hey, we're not so safe. So the energy for me is in flux. It's not fixed. It is not fixed right now for what's going down in 2026 or 2028 for that matter. It's definitely the energy is moving.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that with elections, first of all, the more visibility you get, sensing the trend where it's going, it helps to analyze it a little more, including
Yes.
even aligning it with planets and with cards and so on. And I mean, one of the things that kind of I've noticed right away is that because it's very jittery right now, we're getting a lot of back and forth, and not just here. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the governments that are in power. They throw out the incumbent, and from that vantage point, it's like you just do the thought experiment, and the thought experiment is okay. So if Democrats had won, then they're up for the election in 28. They're more vulnerable. Like basically, whoever is in charge takes the heat. It's very
Yeah,
hard to do
it
government. It's
is.
very, very hard, particularly when you try to do what these guys are trying to do, because you really risk making people super unhappy. And so then, in that sense, you then think, well, from the vantage point of elections, we're better positioned for 28 than we would have been had it been the other way around. But yeah, I mean, if you counter me and say, well, no, because I am dead sure that they're going to just rig the voting. Okay, well then I guess
Possible.
in that
It's not,
case, I don't know what to tell you then,
yeah,
because
it's not impossible and it's not, you know what I mean? Like I said, my cards flip-flop. One day they're like, yeah, everything will be fine. And the next day they're like, maybe not so much. I look forward to the day when they're consistent. Right now they're not consistent about it. But I think that if we if we make it through this, if we make it through this, we come out on the other side very solid as a country. I mean, very, like, I think having this play out and having people see the real destruction that's happening, that, oh, I think it puts a lid on this Trumpism forever. I think it will be seen in history as just like, I don't want to use the nazi word, so I will say nazi. But I think it's looked at really with a very critical eye. Um, it's going to put a lid on it. I think they're going to run it into the ground so bad that nobody will ever want to say I'm MAGA ever again. I think they're going to be ashamed of it. I think
well, I
that's
mean, look, I mean, those are the echoes. Like, without you can't really say, okay, this cycle happens, then you get the same thing. No, but the echoes are there. We are, and this I know that I said many times during the last few years. I just thought that it might be contested in a different way, but this is where Neptune was during the Civil War in the 1860s, and it's reflecting a very similar issue. Very similar. There's a
yeah,
racial quality. I mean, these guys are actually openly saying that we are working to make sure that whites are not discriminated against.
I know.
Okay, well, I mean, that I guess they're sort of in a way, but really, I mean, it's
It's
such a
so
stretch,
blatant.
right? It's such a
It's so
stretch.
blatant.
But the point being, though, that there's a battle happening, and you have to go through the battle, right? It's that
You have
simple to
to.
try to figure out.
Yeah.
And part of it is that they are saying, as you say, right? They're telling you we're really smart. I don't know. I don't know if you're doing something that's going to turn out to be so smart because
Exactly.
you know, my way of understanding the something like the American economy is like the Titanic. It's a big, big ship. You can't turn it quickly. You have to
No.
be very careful. So we'll see, right? We'll see what they
Yeah.
do, and it's all the bottom line. Like for example, so far the MAGA people they should be furious with him. He was saying repeatedly, day one, I'm gonna lower the prices. Of
Yep.
course, he wasn't gonna do that, right?
No.
But it's one thing we're in February, March, that's early. If this keeps going and it's not just eggs, but inflation is building, people are not going to be happy. It's
No.
that
No.
simple, right? I
No.
mean,
They are not.
you can only carry this nonsense on for so long
Yeah.
before there's a problem. So we'll
Yeah.
see, you know?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Do you think that when Neptune moves into Aries, that some of these super hardcore MAGA people are going to go, oh shit?
I don't know that I would. The Neptune in Aries, if anything, it reflects the that almost it's because when you look at the Civil War, Neptune was in early Aries while it was being fought.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
then it moved a little forward, and those years were still really rough because
Yeah.
the years when Lincoln was assassinated and then his replacement was this brutal racist. He was the opposite of Lincoln. So we
Yep.
had to go through more pain, and then the country switched, you know, in a better direction, and we had administrations that were very, well, actually, ironically, they were Republican. You know, Ulysses S.
Mhm.
Grant was a Republican former military person, I believe, general,
Yes.
and it was like the Democrats today, sort of, you know, because that switched. It, I can't say this 100%, but it feels like the Republican Party became more of what it is today by around the 1920s, I think, because that's when
Yeah.
when the Hoover he wanted to do use Republican methods to get the country out of the depression, and it was Roosevelt that brought in the Democratic impulse. So there was a switch, and then there was another big switch in the '60s after Johnson brought in civil rights, and the South completely abandoned the. It's hard to believe that the South was voting Democratic. You know?
I know. I know.
Yeah.
It is wild to me. Ulysses S. Grant was actually stationed in my hometown.
Hmm.
There's a
Interesting.
there's a apocryphal story that he got drunk and was lighting off all the cannons down in the armory.
Jesus, nice,
I don't
nice.
know if it's true. I've never been able to find like evidence of it that it's actually true, but the story is because we have a bay. I live right on the bay, and the story is that he got wasted because he was an alcoholic. He got wasted and he was going off and lighting all the cannons off and letting them all go into the water. It's
Yeah,
true.
that's what really fills in people's stories when you think they're one way and then you dig in and you go, what?
Right.
What was he doing?
Yeah, right. No, Grant, I've done quite a few videos on Grant, and he is an interesting character. Interesting. He never wanted to be in the army. He never wanted to be in the military. He did it because he actually got kicked out of West Point. He left and they brought him back because you're too good. We need you back. He never wanted to deal with any of the war types. Like he never wanted to be president. He didn't want any of it. All this stuff sort of came upon him, and the whole time he's drinking. He's drinking the whole time. But and there's another story that he was drunk at the surrender. When Lee surrendered to him, that he was drunk there too. I don't know if any of that's, I mean, I know he drank, but um that's interesting. That's interesting about so Neptune was in Aries for back then. It was at the Civil War, and then when did it get out of Aries?
No, it didn't get out of Aries until about Neptune spends about 13 years, 13 plus years per sign. So you're talking about 1870, like the mid 1870s. Neptune went into Taurus. So
Wow.
it's a longer thing. But the war lasted 4 years,
Mhm.
and I mean, even though it wasn't perfect after that, things did improve. At least on
Yeah.
that too. Yeah. But I mean, many people will say, no, that war, Reconstruction and all that, and it didn't work out nearly as positively. But it worked out as best it could. Just like now, it probably won't be perfect either.
Yeah.
It's how it is. I
100%.
mean, society in that way is in constant flux. But it's sort of this logic that where people are bringing up fascism and plutocracy, uh, I don't see that fitting the American system well at all. I really don't.
No.
Americans are not the right place to
No.
start these things. China, there have been studies where I heard this podcast at one point, Freakonomics. They're really good at statistics, and they were saying how nationality is the best predictor of behavior, and the Americans are the most independent people on the planet, and Chinese are in a way the least independent. So then
Mhm.
they are
Makes sense.
compliant. They follow the emperor. Here, in fact, the way they put it was the American system is the most innovative and the most independent. So they will invent the vaccine and then not take it, right? Type thing. That's how, that's how it
That
works,
is
right?
just that's
Which is
fully
kind of what
American.
happened, right? I mean, it all
Yeah.
comes out of here. So, this thing is, yeah, you can try different things, and yes, of course, people that have a lot of money have power. That's true. But the notion of an emperor, it just really feels, or a king, it feels so, counter to the American spirit.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. That's, you know what? Let's just end it right there because I feel like that is a perfect place to stop.
yeah,
I think that is brilliant. That
that
is just brilliant.
would be the
So,
ultimate hope. Yeah.
thank you so much for hanging out with me, Andre.
No, that was fun. That was
I
fun as
enjoy it.
always.
I always love it. I always love to get your insights on the astrology. As you know, I'm a bit of a hobbyist, but I don't have the wherewithal to actually study, I think at this point in my life. I don't think I could go back to school. I don't think I could get a master's degree. I don't think I could do any of it. I'm like I do bits and pieces, probably my Gemini moon, but I do bits and pieces and I'm like, okay, that's enough. So I love your knowledge and your expertise.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, astrology is like anything. You have to be into it, and a lot of it is momentum. I mean, by now I'm like a total dinosaur. It's been decades, so there's a point where it just it's like your nervous system is wired to it. So now, in a way, I experience these funny moments where I'll be doing a meditation where the objective is to not be in my thinking or my analysis, because that's the whole point. If you're doing
Right.
that, you're not really meditating. and up will pop a thought that'll go, oh wow, yeah, some astrology thing. It's like the astrology brain kicks in and goes, this is like that and that's like this. And then
Uh-huh.
I even think, well, maybe I should think about this because maybe I'll forget it. But it's better to go back to the meditation. But it's that kind of thing where it has its own logic and it
Yeah.
responds like anything, things that you've done a long time, become like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with
Well,
us.
likewise, that was good. I'm glad to hear about your connections as well with it, with what you've read in the cards and so on. And I'm sure we'll have more to talk about as
Oh
time is
yeah.
passing.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. So, I'm sure you guys know Andre. I'm sure you know where to find him. But in case you don't, in case you're brand new here, Andre, can you let them know where they can find you, and if you're available for personal readings and all of that kind of
I
stuff?
am, and it just through if you just in YouTube type proactive astrology, you'll see the channel, and then in the channel you can click on the top near where all the stuff is. It'll take you to my website and
Perfect.
for setting up all that. Yeah,
Perfect. And
yeah.
you guys, I'm a member of Andre's Patreon and I love it. So I highly recommend it. It's one of the best astrology places where you can put your money. Um, is there anything else I want to say? I don't think so. I think that's it. All right. Okay, everybody. Well, thanks so much for
All
hanging
right,
out and we will see you guys later.
all right. Bye, everyone.